everyone. My name is Chelsey Fuller, and this is my neuron story. With the 3-neuron network, which is simply 3 neurons. Let's call this cell A, cell B, and cell C. And basically, cell A, which is right here, sends to cell B, which sends to cell C. And there we have it, folks. The event. Let's begin with our neuron. That is surrounded in interstitial fluid. So, this part of the neuron is the receiving part. It holds the cell body with the nucleus and other organelles, and also it has these branches which are called dendrites. Now, the signal that is received from these branches, dendrites, goes through the axon helix. And there begins salutatory conduction. So next is solitary conduction. So we want to send the neurotransmission through the helix, which is right here, through the myelin sheath, which is made up by Schwann cells, and also nodes of Ranvier, which is these little spaces, right? All right, so the transmission goes from here and goes over in that like manner, and then goes in here with the nodes and continues to do that, causing more and more energy to go faster to send out the information to the good stuff. So from the myelin sheath, we go onto the axon terminals, which are these blue things right here. And this is a zoomed in image of these buttons. So here we have our button, the axon terminal. And within here we would still have all of our organelles, but mostly important, we have the synaptic vesicles, which hold neurotransmitters. Important parts of this would be the presynaptic membrane, which is this part, and the postsynaptic membrane. Now the postsynaptic membrane is actually on the dendrites. And this space in between is called the synapse, the synaptic space. So what happens is these vesicles continue to move down and they attach to the membrane and they open out, and these neurotransmitters come out of the terminal. So there are reasons behind this. We are trying to get these neurotransmitters to the postsynaptic membrane. But something happens and can happen to these neurotransmitters. The neurotransmitters can either, or these receptors are attached to this, which is called the lipid bilayer, float away and dissipate in the interstitial fluid, like that, just gone. Or they can reuptake, which means basically go back up into the presynaptic membrane. They could also be enzymatic regression, which means these little enzymes that are also in the interstitial fluid could just take these and wither them away. Or what we want to achieve here is that these neurotransmitters attach to the receptor sites that are on the postsynaptic membrane. The purpose of this are the ions. These are going to be our ions, which could be calcium, potassium, and sodium. So that's what these are. And they're just floating in the interstitial fluid, you know. It's positive, more positive outside, and they're more negative on the inside. And also, there are more sodium ions on the outside than on the inside. There's more potassium on the inside. So, this neurotransmitter is to bind to the receptor site. So we're going to pretend that it does that. So before it does that, the receptor is closed. After it does that, it opens up the receptor. And since this part is more positive, there is a pull, which is a force called osmosis, and also electrostatic pressure goes through the receptor, causing these ions to go inside. More or less equal out the amount of sodium and potassium within and outside of the membrane. The question is now, how do these ions reach equilibrium? Well, so what happens is after this comes in basically, then potassium will go out. And this is done with potassium, sodium. It's also important to know that there are voltage channels. There are rising voltage channels which take sodium into the membrane and potassium out of the membrane. It will continue to open and close as necessary to reach equilibrium. What we are trying to achieve is equilibrium between the interstitial fluid and the cytoplasm within the postsynaptic membrane. How would we be able to prove this? Well, we have the oscilloscope where we start. We are at resting membrane potential, which is here. The receptor has not opened, nothing has went through, nothing has happened so far. But the next step is when the neurotransmitter finally does attach to the receptor, opening up the receptor, letting the ions through. That causes for the movement. So let's talk about the oscilloscope. So basically, what is happening is that we are trying to reach equilibrium within the lipid bilayer, between the lipid bilayer, from the interstitial fluid to the cytoplasm. On the outside of the postsynaptic membrane, there are more sodium ions than there are both calcium and potassium. But on the inside, there are more potassium ions than there are calcium and sodium. So we're trying to even it out. And the way we actually can see that is this oscilloscope. So here are bursts of neurotransmitter molecules. This is called depolarization. But before we get there, we want to note that there will be more and more neurotransmitters building up. That it's called summation, and that's what this line is right here. So we go from at rest to the opening up of the receptor to the building up of the neurotransmitters, causing more and more movement throughout the cell. It's called EPSP, which stands for excitatory postsynapic potential, which is when the binding of the neurotransmitters molecules cause it to open, causing summation, which then adds a burst of energy in the start of depolarization as sodium goes into the receptor, into the cytoplasm. This goes all the way up till -55. And this is where action potential is. At the event of action potential, sodium is at its peak, and now potassium must be taken out to reach equilibrium. Here, it is called the inhibitory postsynaptic potential, and potassium is leaving the receptor into the interstitial fluid. The falling phase of action potential. And actually, it overshoots and goes into the negatives, the -75 down here, which it has a pump, a calcium pump, to make it even, make the sodium and the potassium even within the cell, so that it can go back to the resting state, which is the neurotransmitter coming out of the receptor and going back into the terminal button, into a vesicle. Back to the sagittary conduction, which the charges go through the myelin ceph, jumping from nose and river to nose and river, making the reaction go from dendrite to the myelin ceph, through the axon helix, actually, myelin ceph, and then out the terminals. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is my neuron story. Hope you enjoyed.